What is up, Vortex Nation? Got an absolutely awesome opportunity for you. This is your chance to win a Razor AMG UH-1 Gen 2 holographic weapon sight in its new colorway, tan. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got one in front of me right now. But that's not all. It's not even close to all, because you're going to get a matching Aero Precision AR-15 along with a Slingster carbine sling from our good friends over at Faro Concepts. Entering is easy. Simply sign up for the Vortex Nation newsletter at join.vtxnation.com. If you can't remember that, no problem, because we've posted that link in the show notes below. Without further ado, let's start the show. But before we do, let me just say this. Good luck.
Really, at the end of the day, what is the Constitution doing? Protecting a pre-existing right and the government from infringing on it. And I think that's a point that a lot of people don't get or don't understand. The Constitution doesn't give you the right for anything. All it does is prevent the government from infringing on a pre-existing right.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Vortex Nation podcast. I am joined by my good friend, Mr. Sawyer Briel, and our very special guest in studio this time, Adam, Mr. Adam Kraut from the Second Amendment Foundation. Now, Adam, we did a podcast. It was episode 288, if you don't recall the number, which I had to look it up too. 288, it was a really good one. We talked about the Second Amendment Foundation in general. We talked about your path into firearms, you know, how you wound up at the Second Amendment Foundation. So we're not going to go as in-depth this time. And actually, that's a little trick of mine. I bring these things up and point people back, and then it gets the listens up. And then I still get to be here at Vortex. So it's a little strategy there.
Job security 101.
Yeah. did I just let the cat out of the bag there a little bit?
It's cool. We can edit that part out, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the beauty of it too. So, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the trip. You spent a little time at the Vortex Edge facility yesterday.
We did.
Exercising your Second Amendment rights and just the utility and fun that firearms offer. So how was that?
It was awesome. Corey, who was our instructor that was given to us for the day, was great. Very personable and walked us through a number of things. You know, we started back at the fundamentals, which is always a good thing. Mm-hmm. I think there are certainly people who egos can't take. I've been shooting for years, and why are we talking about fundamental things? And what I found in my experience is always going back to the basics helps you continue to be a better shooter as you try to do things that are more complex or faster, things like that. So we shot a couple of the red dots on various handguns, and then broke out the 300 blacks.
Ooh.
And the ARs, and shot those for a little bit as well. So it was a good time. Did everything from small focus groups all the way out to transitioning targets, keeping up a cadence and all of that. So good stuff and a lot of fun and beautiful facility.
Oh, very cool. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you're able to get to, go down there and send a few rounds down range and like you said, boy, those fundamentals, they really are fundamental.
Yes,
as I like to say. Mm-hmm. Okay. The Second Amendment Foundation, Adam. Mm-hmm. If you can, though, give us kind of a quick and dirty about the Second Amendment Foundation.
Sure. So the Second Amendment Foundation, this is our 50th anniversary, so we've been around for 50 years. And the whole point of the organization was to elevate a case to the Supreme Court, or that was the original idea when it was started. I don't say that's the whole point of it. What we do is we engage in education of the public on the right to keep and bear arms, and the constitutional heritage surrounding it, as well as a robust litigation program that defends, restores, and advances that right. That's the real down and dirty version of it. And so to that end, right now, we have about 55 active lawsuits across the country on a number of issues that affect the right to keep and bear arms, everything from assault weapons bans, magazine capacity restrictions, to challenging ATF's final rules, young adult issues, and sensitive places, and a whole bunch of other more nuanced things that are not quite as big, as far as scale, but still affect that right in various parts of the country or various subsets of Americans. And then from the educational perspective, it's a matter of just teaching people about the importance of it and why it exists and the purpose in defending it to help hopefully bring another generation of Second Amendment defenders and activists to the table to continue that legacy.
Very cool. That's a big job.
Yeah. It is when you stop and think about it. So I try not to think about it and just do the job.
Mm-hmm. Just stay buried, nose to the grindstone, look up every now and again, grab some air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's when I stop to actually think about what I'm being tasked with and the position I'm in, which there was no ambition to be here, by the way. It was just kind of how life worked out, which is really cool. But when I think about the gravity of what is kind of entrusted to me and then the folks I work with, that's no small weight at all, actually. I certainly personally very much care about the right to keep and bear arms. It was something that was important to me as an individual, and the fact that I get to do this as a job and a career is very humbling. I take it very seriously, but it is quite onerous at times where you're like, wow, the magnitude of what's kind of being entrusted, and that people are placing their faith in you to do what's best for them by donating to the organization or joining as a member. So we take that very seriously here. We don't screw around with it. So I try not to think about it. I try to just do the work and get through the day, because that the perspective is a lot sometimes.
And 50 years is a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there a couple like greatest hits or specific cases that really come to mind for you or for SAF that either really put you guys on the map or just you think might have been like watershed or really impactful moments as it pertains to the Second Amendment?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the history, and you got to remember, generally when we're talking about litigation in Second Amendment cases, really the world kind of began with Heller in 2008. But if we rewind back into the 80s, then Mayor Dianne Feinstein had a total handgun ban in San Francisco, and SAF sued her and won back in the 80s. There was also a town that I always forget the name of up in Connecticut, same thing, total handgun ban. They got sued, we won. And then you look at Heller, and we'll fast forward. There was a handful of other things that were done in the interim, but nothing really like what's going on now, where progress is being made at an astonishing rate in the restoration of the right. So you get Heller in 2008. The day Heller was decided, we filed McDonald versus City of Chicago. And that really, I think, is right now the organization's crown jewel, because it was the second major Supreme Court case that dealt with the Second Amendment right. And what that did was say that the Second Amendment is applicable to the states, and that's through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So all these lawsuits against various states, whether it's California, New York, New Jersey, or any of the cities or towns or municipalities within them, it's because of McDonald versus City of Chicago. And then certainly during our time, we've done everything from carry issues where we've been successful, restoration of rights, so prohibited persons, nonviolent misdemeanors was a big one, which is still kind of circulating around. And with Rahimi being decided the other week, that issue is Rahimi was not a nonviolent misdemeanor, but that issue is percolated back into conversation in the mainstream of, okay, well, how does this affect other people's rights? Right now we have a case that we filed a motion to intervene with an ATF's framer receiver rule that's going to be heard at the Supreme Court. So right now briefing is underway on that. Oral argument scheduled for sometime in October on that case. So there's quite a bit of things. It's hard to point to any number one, other than I would say McDonald being the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
But every time that we've brought a lawsuit and have been successful, I think those are all things that we can look back on and just say, like, yes, these are good, because at the end of the day, when we're successful in any of our lawsuits, it's either restoring or advancing the right, or in some instances defending it from being stripped even further. So they're all good, and it's just a matter, I guess, what's the impact as far as scale?
Mm-hmm. I just got one more quick follow-up. We might have a few attorneys listening, Adam, and I know, Mark, you want to get into like funding and why orgs like SAF need funding and why they need staff and all the time that goes into it. Can you just give a real quick and dirty, and I know this is kind of a tough question case by case, but what does the process look like for you guys to attack or litigate one of these cases? Like, can you give an example from start to finish of like what that actually looks like?
Sure. So we're going to split this up into a couple different pathways. When we're talking about our litigation program, there's what I like to call two buckets. We have our strategic litigation program, which is where we sit down and we look at what the current landscape of law looks like and how do we want to shape it. So that's in our strategic bucket. So from there, we'll say, okay, if we want to advance this aspect of the right or restore it here, we need to bring this type of lawsuit and we need to do it in these particular locations, sometimes more than one. And these are the resources we'll need for it. So the lawyers, obviously, we got to go find plaintiffs. That's a whole thing. Finding people to be involved in the lawsuit is actually a really big thing, and not an easy one either. There's a lot of people that volunteer, and then you start to look at them a little more closely and go, not the best. They might be a little more vocal than you would like, and while from an activist standpoint, that's great. From a plaintiff standpoint, that can cause problems later on in litigation, particularly in discovery. So there's the shaping of the world, what we want to do. Then there's what I like to call opportunistic litigation, where somebody will send an email, call in, somehow otherwise get in touch with us, and maybe a lawyer will reach out, hey, I got this case or this problem, and we look at it and we say, okay, that might not have been in our strategic plan, but there is a public interest in bringing a lawsuit that deals with this person's issue, and while it helps that single individual directly, there's a bigger public effect that also emanates from that. So those are the two buckets. From there, typically the way our pathway in any of these lawsuits work is you'll file a complaint, you'll potentially file for a preliminary injunction, and then you'll get discovery where both sides get to ask questions of each other, ask for documents, things like that. It can be a long, arduous process. And then usually 9 times out of 10, actually probably like 9.9 times out of 10, the rest of it's all just papers that are explaining why, from a legal standpoint, we're correct, and the government will, of course, argue why it's correct. But there's no trial. This is very much just legal argument. There's usually not facts in dispute. So that's what's called summary judgment. And then from there, you'll get a decision. You'll go up on appeal because nobody likes to lose, whether it's the government or the people bringing the lawsuit. You'll fight it out in the circuit courts for a while, potentially ask for en banc review, and then likely a cert petition at the end of all that. So that's a very condensed elementary version of it. It's certainly a lot more complicated than that. From a time perspective, let's just say we filed the lawsuit, ignoring all the work that's done on the front end. You're looking at least a year at the district court before anything happens, potentially even longer, year and a half. Circuit courts, again, year to year and a half, potentially even longer than that. And then you get to the Supreme Court, and if there is a cert grant, you're looking at another year and a half before there's a decision. So if we look at, I'm trying to think of a recent case. I'm blanking on this one. I was going to give you an example to see the time period. But by the time the Supreme Court hears a case, you're anywhere from 4 to 5 years, generally speaking. Now that's not the case with the framer receiver thing that's going up there. But generally it's not a fast process. And then of course it's an expensive process. Lawyers are not inexpensive. The filings and all the time that's invested in it, you're spending quite a bit in resources. The good thing, I guess, for people that are concerned or want to know about it is that if ultimately you're successful, you can petition the court for attorney's fees and costs. Now I know what people are thinking. Great, you're getting all your money back. Not quite. Unfortunately with that, what the courts do is they cut down the attorney's fees. So if we're working with an attorney, let's just say is $600 an hour, and that's, not the most expensive and certainly not the cheapest. The court may say like, okay, yes, we agree you won, you're entitled to fees, but we're not giving it to you at $600 an hour. We'll do like $250 an hour. So then there's that deficit of what was already paid to the attorney versus what's actually recouped. So we're never actually made whole, if you will, but it certainly does help. And then again, that money gets just spun around and right back into the program because we still got more people to sue.
And have you guys seen your backlog grow? Is that cyclical with the speed of government, the party in power? Like, is it cyclical that way, or?
When you say backlog, give me more context. Just want to make sure I'm answering your
Yep.
question.
What does your laundry list of cases that you guys know you want to address or attack look like? Is that usually pretty backed up?
Yes. There is a list of cases we would like to bring. Some of it is dependent on the outcome of other cases. So from a timing perspective, there are things we want to do, but it doesn't make sense to bring those lawsuits now while there's other outstanding things that affect those currently sitting there in some ways. Some of it, candidly, is reactive. We'll take Bruin as the example here. Bruin gets decided, what does New York do? New York passes a law that deals with so-called sensitive places. California passes a law. New Jersey passes a law. Maryland passes a law. So all those were not planned litigation, but in response to governments doing something stupid and that we believe to be unconstitutional. So it's really kind of a mixed bag when we look at how that is. Some of it is stuff we absolutely do want to do, and it's just, okay, we're trying to get with the strategic stuff, get these first little steps set up so that we can take the next step. And I think that's one of the other things that's kind of important to point out, is that a lot of this, if you look at how the restoration has gone from Heller to McDonald to, you could even talk about Catano for a moment, where it says that stun guns are in fact protected arms, and then Bruin, well, Heller, you get right to keep arms in the home, that it's an individual right untethered to militia service. It does talk about bear, and if you actually read the opinion, like, you would say that yes, bear is protected as well. And it also tells the world about the test, that it's the text of the Second Amendment as informed by the nation's history and tradition, which then the lower courts went on for 14 years to screw up royally. You get McDonald, which reaffirms what Heller says and then says that this is all applicable against the states. Catano, we talk about stun guns, that they're protected arms, doesn't have to exist at the time of the founding. And then you get Bruin, which really goes into detail about carry. So if we look at the different little segments that are kind of established by the Supreme Court, it's not just from 0 to 100. It's a little thing here, a little thing there, a little here. So when we're talking about the cases we're bringing and how we're going about it, it's, okay, well, how much of a step can we reasonably get out of this versus trying to go for the whole kit and caboodle? Because odds are you're not going to get the whole thing. So you got to incrementally, unfortunately, chip away at it. And, it's not anything that's pleasant, if you will, because you're trying to get from 0 to 100. But realistically, with the way judges are, you're just not going to get that in any instance.
Man, that's a lot. I mean, I'm hearing you talk through so many things, and because, we're involved in the outdoor firearms industry, like, I would consider myself like probably more educated than maybe like the average person, but also, like, I hear you talking about stuff that's like absolute second nature, and I'm like, oh man, and it is, because you're like intimately just so close to it, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know what the heck's going on out there.
And that's the importance of orgs like this, right?
Right.
Like, obviously, you never want to put blind trust in somebody or an organization, but knowing that there are organizations and hearing Adam explain this, like, should give you a fair bit of confidence that, like, I'm not an attorney. I'm going to try to stay up as much as I physically can on everything going on. But there is a point where it's just like, I need to now support these orgs however I can, because I trust and I know that they are doing all of these things. And that was kind of the spirit of the question, with just how busy you guys are.
I think, to the point about blind trust, I certainly don't ask anybody for blind trust. One of the things I used to say when I was at my former employer, which was a different organization, was that, take a look at what we do, and if you like it, hopefully you'll support us, and if not, hopefully we'll get there one day. And I would say the same thing here. I certainly don't expect people to just go, oh, Vortex has Adam on from the Second Amendment Foundation, let me just go give my dollars. Like, check us out. Make sure that you're comfortable with us, and hopefully we're doing a good job. I think our work speaks for itself. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in what the organization was doing. And being successful at it is actually a very high priority for us for any number of reasons, including that, like, at the end of the day, we're here to win. Losing is not an option, and it's certainly not a good position to be in. particularly when you're talking about a constitutional right. And really, at the end of the day, what is the Constitution doing? Protecting a pre-existing right and the government from infringing on it. And I think that's a point that a lot of people don't get or don't understand. The Constitution doesn't give you the right for anything. All it does is prevent the government from infringing on a pre-existing right. And that's something where I think, depending upon what side of the aisle you're on, the Constitution allows me to do this. Not really. Your right to, self-defense and armed self-defense is a natural right that predates the Constitution. So just a side rant note.
No, but I mean, I think what I'm hearing, or the way I'm understanding that, which I think is incredibly important to point out, it wasn't the government that gave you that right. Like, it's not theirs to give or take away. That is an innate thing that you have as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think another interesting thing too, and Adam, this is kind of a loaded question, but just looking at the breadth of the work that you guys are doing right now, like, let's say in the last calendar year, do you think the majority was in the bucket of restore, preserve, or enhance in regard to the Second Amendment?
I would say that there's a fair amount of restoration going on. You look at the number of laws that have been passed over, really from the 60s, I would say is kind of, you take the Gun Control Act as being really the big one. You get the Federal Firearms Act in 1938. I know everybody loves to talk about the NFA, so the NFA of 34 kind of being the start of it, dealing with the gangsters and all that. And then you get the Federal Firearms Act of 38, which really kind of starts outlining prohibited persons and crimes. And then you get 68, the GCA, and then you get the Firearms Owner Protection Act of 86. And I'm just going to keep rambling here on things that were passed. But the reality of it is that I think a lot of the work, unfortunately, is in the restoration aspect of it and defense. There is some on the advance, but take for an instance assault weapons bans. Right now, I think we have 6 cases dealing with assault weapons bans, and I think 8 on magazine capacity restrictions because there's a few more of those. That's quite a bit, and that all goes to restore because the rest of the country gets to use and enjoy those firearms, whether it's for self-defense, whether it's for hunting, competition, whatever the pathway is on that or desire. But then you get states like California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington. They all have assault weapons bans. So for those people, it's restoring their rights. And, sensitive places would be another one where it's restore. You look, what's kind of fascinating about that is those governments went through and basically said, like, okay, we understand you have the right to carry and we respect that, but you can't carry in all these places. And really at the end of the day, what do? They more or less eliminated the right to actually bear arms. So they don't respect it. And the ironic thing is that you look at the places that they designated as sensitive places in some of them, and there's absolutely zero historical tradition of those places being off limits. All of a sudden, this new thing. So again, the restore bucket. It's just, I'd say a lot of it, unfortunately, is restore.
I think that's good perspective for people to have listening too. Like, just with how busy you guys are, and just all of the fires to put out constantly.
Well, and that's a really good point to bring up. There's only so many of us. There's only so many lawyers that are good at this, and there's just priorities. We can't possibly touch every single issue. There's not enough of us or money or resources to go around to be able to do it. So unfortunately, we have to pick and choose. And while there may be people who are disappointed that the thing that's important to them isn't being addressed right now, we're looking at it from what has the biggest overall public benefit. And sometimes it's not the more nuanced issue, and sometimes it's not sometimes it's also just not a, like, I hate to say it, but like sexy issue.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just a very plain, boring thing, but it affects a lot of people. So that's kind of how we're looking at things through the lens, anyway.
How do states like California, Washington, I guess, get to that place where you guys are put into the position to have to restore something when the Second Amendment, it is part of the Constitution. Like, where's the, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like disconnect, or like how does that break down to where at that level these things start to happen?
People. It's people, plain and simple. You get the legislatures who pass the laws in the first place, so it's people. They're running on emotion. They're pandering to their base. They're saying that they're doing something to prevent whatever they're trying to prevent, whether there's any basis for it or not. And then, unfortunately, judges are people too. So at the end of the day, this is the awful thing about lawyers. Like, they tend to argue both sides. So if a judge really wants to find a result, this is what the law says, and this is what how case law works, and what we're to take away from it. But if I just kind of do this and skirt it a little bit, or tweak it to say, like, well, I think they meant this. Okay, that's the decision. And when we're talking about the federal system, you have the federal district courts, which are the trial courts. You have the circuit courts, which are the appellate courts, and then you have the Supreme Court. And this is, I was going to try to make this point later, but I'll make it now. This is why kind of, elections do matter. I've been asked about this a number of times, and the question's been along the lines of, what's the issue or potential problems with the federal court system. Right now, the courts, generally speaking, post-Bruin, are really good. I saw numbers the other day that, like 2 weeks ago, if you look at the number of federal judges Trump appointed when he was in his term, and that Biden has appointed in his term, they're about equal. There's some disconnect, but they're about equal. There's close to 600, I think, trial court judges or federal district court judges. I forget what the number of circuit court judges, but the appointments were about 200 at the district court, and then whatever it was about equal at the circuit court. Point of this being, you get a judge at the trial court who finds against you, and it goes up to the circuit court. Depending upon the composition of the circuit court, if the circuit court affirms their opinion, the Supreme Court doesn't have to take the case, which is what we've seen with cert petitions in the Supreme Court for years, that they just get denied. Sometimes they get denied with a dissent, but they haven't been granting Second Amendment cases. And the issue with that becomes that that's then the law of the circuit. So the other point on this being is that you get another 4 years of a president that's hostile to firearms rights and is electing or appointing judges that are getting confirmed by the Senate that have anti-Second Amendment views. Doesn't matter whether the Supreme Court remains untouched if they don't take another case. If the lower courts and the circuit courts get stacked in a negative way, then you're just stuck with that until the Supreme Court takes a case, and at that point it may or may not be a favorable court. So that was part of the point anyway. We return back to California or Washington. That's how, the Ninth Circuit in particular has been. The trial court judges almost always have found against it. The Ninth Circuit has been an awful place to litigate these. Post-Heller, before Bruin, I think the Ninth Circuit heard 50 Second Amendment cases. There were some cases where a panel, and I guess we'll come back to the point here in a second. When a case goes to the circuit court, when it's heard at first, it's usually heard by a 3-judge panel. Otherwise, it can be heard for a second time en banc, which means the court as a whole, and I forget what the number of judges is in the 12th Circuit, it varies by circuit, but it's like 12 judges hear the case. Very rarely will a circuit court hear it for the first time en banc. It's usually a panel, and then a party who loses will ask for rehearing. The government in California loves to ask the Ninth Circuit for its help en banc. So case goes up. There was an adverse finding against the state at the trial court, goes up to the circuit court, 3-judge panel affirms that decision or overturns the lower one and finds that, yes, this violates the Second Amendment. Every single time, state of California would say, like, help us, Ninth Circuit. We have a bad decision. And the Ninth Circuit would step in as, en banc as a whole and reverse and find that, no, this law is in fact constitutional. 50 times. 50 cases through the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit affects, I think, 8 or 9 states. It's a big circuit. And so that's how that happens. And then the Supreme Court doesn't step in and grant cert and correct the issue for any number of reasons. Maybe there weren't enough votes to grant cert. Maybe the judges who wanted to see it granted were concerned about how the votes on the court would actually turn out and didn't want to potentially do damage to the Second Amendment. There is some strategy in that. Perhaps they wanted to see what other circuit courts decided on that same issue, which is a thing that the Supreme Court likes to do, where there's circuit splits. One court decides it this way, one court decides it that way. We step in, level the playing field, and on we go. But that's kind of how it happens. I mean, at the end of the day, it's people. It's not a perfect system.
And then, where people come into play from, like, a voting aspect or formulating their beliefs, to me, like, I guess, maybe personal opinion, but it appears oftentimes there's a fair amount of what I would consider like misinformation, disinformation, twisting of facts, statistics, selective statistics to maybe, benefit, a certain narrative. But if those things are found to be just like factually incorrect, are there any repercussions for the people who are perpetuating those things?
No.
Okay.
Not that I've seen. And then I think, if we're looking at it just from a standpoint of how people operate, and this is a point I've made a number of times, but I think it's worth reiterating, is that people who are pro Second Amendment tend to present things in a logical or statistical manner.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the statistics say. The point you're trying to make about these, we'll use the assault weapons as the example. Like the amount of crime that semi-automatic firearms or rifles are used in is minimal. Like it's a statistical blip, really. But from an emotional standpoint, people say, well, like, I'm scared of, or I fear of this. And so it doesn't matter how much statistics you put in a person's face who's operating on emotion. Logic and reason and emotion they're never going to communicate in the same manner. It's just not going to happen. They're two different languages. And I think that's a problem that, we on this side of the fence face, is that we love to just wrap ourselves in numbers and statistics and logic, and you're dealing with somebody who's not thinking in the same space or language as you. So there's a communication barrier, and at the end of the day, like logic and reason versus emotion's going to win every time, at least as far as what that person's thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big facts over feelings type of person, but that's where sometimes I have a hard time understanding when we get into like the courts and the litigation and this. Like, to me, like, once we present the facts, then we should be good, because like that should be like the baseline, like factual things should be the baseline of reality and how. And so that's not only do I not understand it, but I do find it eternally frustrating.
And that was a lot of why I wanted to, for people listening, to have you, Adam, walk through the full process of how this stuff actually happens. Because I think somebody watches Suits and they're like...
that happens overnight. We're in court the next day arguing and getting a decision from the judge. No.
They got him again. They're undefeated. Like, they had the information, the judge heard it, and it was game over. Like, everyone goes out for martinis. It's beautiful.
I've never been invited to the bar for martinis.
Those two got married, like, very inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Adam, you're painting a very different picture than I expected.
Yeah.
Going into this.
If life were like Suits, it would be a very interesting ride. I would tell you that much. Like far different. But I think going back to that point on the process, you got to remember a couple other things. These are not the only cases on a judge's docket. Judges have number of cases on their docket. Some judges don't want to touch the issue, and depending upon what the underlying basis of the lawsuit is, if it's something that's potentially very controversial, like, you got to remember, at the end of the day, that judge's name is on the opinion. So if they go and, regardless of whether it's the right, or from a legal standpoint, whether it's the right answer, their name's at the bottom of it, and they very well, some of them might be very hesitant to put their name on something that, yes, like from a legal perspective, absolutely 100% correct. But if something were to happen, they're going to get pointed at and blamed for it. Regardless of, like, we live in a world or a system where there are laws, and, just because somebody violates the law and might do something horrible, and, doesn't change that, yes, this is in fact a constitutionally protected thing. The process is not short, though. There's scheduling where it's laid out as far as these are when briefs are due, the time period for the other side to respond, you to reply to them. And then from there, the judge has to, or his law clerk or her law clerk has to sift through it, and, they work together to write an opinion based on the information presented to them. And like I said, sometimes it can be kind of quick depending upon where it is in the process, but ultimately, like, you're looking at a year to a year and a half before you're out of the trial court, and it's frustrating for everybody.
All right, Vortex Nation, just want to take a minute here to thank you for listening, to thank you for watching, to thank you for liking, sharing, commenting on the Vortex Nation podcast. Now I'm going to provide comment on the comment of the week. This one comes from @WheatThins57. It's in relation to the podcast we did with our good friend Dan Staton on backcountry food nutrition. It says, really enjoy the nutritional deep dives that you guys have been doing. Gets me motivated again to start being a bit more healthy on and off the mountain. I just need to hold my own feet to the fire. Thanks for another great podcast. Well, I'll tell you what, @WheatThins57, that is the greatest challenge. We can listen to podcasts on everything under the sun, but it's the doing that's the hard part. And I think I need to hold my feet to the fire a little bit better too. Maybe we all could. Anyway, here's some good news. And you don't even have to do anything now. You're going to get yourself one of these super sweet Vortex Nation podcast hoodies. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm wearing one right now. We're going to reach out to you, and maybe we can provide some sort of support to one another so we can be healthier, work out, eat all the right foods in the field. But until then, thanks again for watching. Thanks again for listening. Let's continue the show. One thing that I want to jump back into, which actually it's just almost like a clarifying thing or something I'm curious about, because I'm not super familiar with the courts and the processes. Like you're talking about, the Ninth Circuit Court, the Fifth Circuit Court, the 12th. Some are, you might argue, are like not 2A friendly. Some are more 2A friendly. You did mention one of those courts could encompass multiple states. So like what do these different courts look like, and how does that break down? And how does that affect the people as a whole? And I guess I don't know, if I was to, I don't know. Yeah. I guess I don't have anything outside of that. I just don't really understand it.
Sure. So the way it works, you have district courts that are in each state. Some states have more than one district in the state, so I'll use Pennsylvania as the example here. Pennsylvania has 3 different districts. It has the Eastern, the Middle, and the Western District. So depending upon where geographically you live in the state is which one of those districts you would bring a lawsuit in.
Okay.
There's other rules, but that's the general premise of it. Pennsylvania's in the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit encompasses Delaware, Jersey, Pennsylvania, and I think it's the Virgin Islands, if I remember correctly. One of the territories.
Nice.
And so that's what that controls. So if there's a decision out of the Third Circuit, it only affects those states. Right. And so when you look at all the circuits throughout the country, whatever states or districts fall under that circuit are going to be bound by that circuit court's decision. It's not going to matter whether a different circuit court arrived at a different conclusion. If that circuit decides the issue, that's the law of the circuit, and people in that circuit have to live with it. That's how you get circuit splits, which is one of the things that the Supreme Court looks for when it considers taking a case, because having 2/3 of the country live under this rule of law and the other third living under a different rule of law, well, clearly that's not a compatible, particularly when we're talking about a constitutional right. That just doesn't work. And then, of course, the Supreme Court sits at the very tippy top of all that pile and can clarify everything for everyone. And then we go back to square one. And once again, you have judges making decisions that different interpretations of text, or what the test requires, or whose burden it is to present whatever the information is. And then, that's where you start to get different decisions at the district court, and then it goes up to the circuit courts, and you get circuit courts that decide things different ways, and on we go, and round. So that's kind of it. But there are I think 13 circuits total. There's 11 actual circuits that deal with states. Then you get the federal circuit, and there's one other circuit that's escaping my brain right now. That's a different set of courts that wouldn't affect this issue directly.
Sounds pretty daunting, Adam.
I don't know if it's daunting. It's just, if you don't live in the world, it sounds very complex. And then if you live in it, it just becomes part of life, and it's not as daunting as when you're on the outside looking in, I guess. Gotcha.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, to your point, it is, there's definitely an organized structure to it.
Sure. I mean, it would be like if you told me about manufacturing optics. I'm like, oh, okay. You have what, glass in a housing? That's about all I know. So the rest of it would be,
This is true.
Math.
This is true.
Great. I'm out.
I do oftentimes think about the terminology in the hunt shoot industry, and it is like, if you were from the outside in, it is like a second language.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All the acronyms.
Yeah, you'd be like, even just like, my favorite hunting rifle. Oh, I'm shooting a 300 WSM, pushing a 190 ABLR at 2875. People would be like,
Well, I think speaking of the hunting world, Adam, too, I think one thing that I wanted to touch on that I thought was kind of interesting, and I was interested to get your perspective. So in the conservation world, from an organization perspective, there are some that you can consider like blanket, like when we're talking about like hunting rights, like Sportsman's Alliance, I'll use it as an example. But beyond that, you've got, say, Mark really loved to hunt mule deer. He would likely be a member of the Mule Deer Foundation. They are pretty laser focused in what they do and their mission. Do you find that to be the case on the two-way firearms side? Or I guess the question is there something that distinguishes SAF from other similar organizations? Do you have a specialty? Or do you find that in the two-way shooting space, there's lots of organizations doing similar things in maybe different nuanced ways? And the reason I ask that is for a consumer who is like, I love the Second Amendment. I love my firearms. I believe in it very deeply. I don't know where to devote my time, money, resources, volunteerism, etc.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of things. Number one, our experience in the area where we've been doing it. So the courtroom has been our bread and butter. We've been working with lawyers and scholars in figuring out pathways to build a foundation to get cases to the Supreme Court for 50 years now. And that all started back in the 70s, where we gathered the who's who of the scholarly community and the lawyers to figure out strategically what needs to be done. And building a foundation isn't something that happened overnight. And then, since our inception, we've been involved in over 260 cases, whether it's cases we filed, whether it's cases that we've supported financially where it wasn't necessarily appropriate for us to be a party to the case, or filing briefs in other people's cases to help try to get a win there. So I think our experience in the court system certainly is more extensive than others. I will note that I think up until maybe 10 years ago, people were having some pretty good luck in the lobbying world and the legislative world. And then those doors started to kind of close. And I think those organizations have turned their attention to the courts because they saw that the courts were where advancements were being made right now, and that the other pathway was just one that spending money wasn't really going to go anywhere. So I think at this point, to your point, for somebody who's looking at an organization, well, you're all filing lawsuits. Well, I think at this point, everybody has figured out that that's a pretty good place to be doing work. And certainly other groups are getting wins as well. They can't discount that. And at the end of the day, we're here to advance the Second Amendment. It would be nice if it was our win, not going to lie about that. Like, it's great to be able to plant that flag and trot it out. But at the end of the day, all we care about is winning. So whether that's we're working with another group to help support their lawsuit, whether it's openly or behind the scenes, or lawyers. So I think that's one of the things that, our experience allows us to do and do better than most, is because we've been doing it for so long. So we have a good sense of that. And we've worked with, the top attorneys in the space for years on this exact issue.
And that was going to be my question, and I think you answered it, but is there an appetite for collaboration within the space between these orgs to pool resources, work together? I know that's a loaded question, but
I'll answer it. Sometimes. the Second Amendment Foundation, one of the things we do pride ourselves on is playing nicely with others and working with others. We have a number of alliances or very good relationships with a lot of state organizations, which is in fact, how a lot of our lawsuits have come to be. They'll either help find plaintiffs or they'll say, hey, we have this problem where there's this bill being passed, but we can't financially afford to fight it. Like, cool, let's team up. Tell you what, we'll help you, you help us. You find the people that allow us to be the vehicle for this, we'll bring the lawsuit all day. You can go, you can tell your members that you're doing stuff, you can fundraise off it, we don't care. All we want to do is promote that we're working together for the betterment of everybody. And we do that with some national groups too. Some play more nicely than others. Some it's just a matter of, okay, well, we disagree as to the strategy on this particular issue. So you can go your way, we'll go our way. But at the end of the day, like, we're all trying to get the same thing, and that's a win. So yes, I would say that, we in particular are happy to work with any number of groups. You can see that on any number of our, different various lawsuits that are out there who we're working with or have worked with in the past. And that's something we try to, maintain is a good relationship with people, because at the end of the day, it doesn't always make sense for us to go our own way, whether it's us or another group. Sometimes it does, it is more smart, economical, efficient. That's the word I'm looking for. Efficient to work together and just work to get it done as a group versus everybody doing their own thing.
For sure. Yeah, I could definitely see way more often than not working together collaboratively, like you said, pulling resources. Everybody's got the same goal, garnering a better end result. I'd be curious, are there ever times where maybe attacking the same issue with, at the end of the day, the same desired outcome, but like you said, maybe a different path, is attacking it from different angles ever a positive strategy?
Usually, yeah, it can be. Usually, I would say that a lot of times that lawsuits are brought on the same topic or a same challenge don't really vary all that much in strategy. It might vary in where it's brought, so it might not be in the same court. We can use the bump stock issue as an example here, right? When that rule was signed, I filed a lawsuit in the district court in the District of Columbia. There was another case filed a little bit later in the District Court of Columbia as well. You have Cargill, which was the case the Supreme Court ultimately just recently decided, which was filed down in Texas. I believe you had one in the 8th Circuit. I forget what state that one was filed in. I think you had another in Florida. So point of this being is that you have a number of lawsuits that, if you look at the claims that were brought, weren't drastically different. Mm-hmm. They were all kind of arguing the same thing, and certainly the government's argument in return was the same in every case. So they were arguing the same position consistently, which makes sense because there's the same defendant. But those lower courts arrived at differing conclusions, ultimately. You get particularly the circuit courts. You get the 5th Circuit that says like no, ATF is wrong. You get other circuit courts that are upholding what ATF did. So yeah, there can be in that regard some advantage to bringing a case in a different place. Sometimes it's what's called to as it's kind of a negative context, but forum shopping. Like you're looking for a good place to bring a case because it's going to be likely a favorable result. So right now, if we talk about the 5th Circuit, and I know this is a little tangential, but the 5th Circuit right now I don't think would find a gun control law that it would be willing to uphold. Now, post-Rahimi, might that change? I don't know, but they're also the circuit that gave us Rahimi. You look at other circuits and they're more inclined to find that, yes, this is a reasonable historical analog based on what Bruin says, and, we're going to uphold this restriction. So I think some of it's also picking where to bring a lawsuit, and sometimes you're just stuck with where you have to be because that's the state that has it, and you're in that circuit. So if we talk about so-called assault weapons bans again for a moment, you're not going to be able to bring a case like that in the 5th Circuit. Why? Because Louisiana and Texas and Mississippi don't have assault weapons bans. So you're never going to get in front of those judges on the 5th Circuit because there's nothing to challenge there in that regard. So you're stuck in these other places.
Gotcha.
I don't know if that helps or not.
No, it certainly does. And then I would venture to guess, whenever whenever there is a win, it does set some sort of precedent, or people can point to or lean back on these things?
Yeah, so it would in the circuit. It would be the law of the circuit, which would bind all the district courts in that circuit. And, again, depending upon how many states are in that those districts are, under that circuit, it might affect that many people. So that, again, the Ninth Circuit as an example here, you're talking, I think, again, about 9 states. That's a lot of, at least land mass. I don't know about population wise. California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, things like that. But if you're not in a circuit where that decision binds or controls, that can be pointed to as persuasive authority. So you can say to the court that you're litigating in, like, hey, this circuit court found this. And you should consider their reasoning, but they don't have to adopt it or follow it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
It is. What are you seeing as far as gun culture in America today? Like, you guys are, definitely in the trenches fighting a lot of battles, but like in general, what are you seeing as far as like, appetite, support for the Second Amendment, and things like that?
I think overall, you're seeing a positive trend towards gun rights and the ability to exercise your Second Amendment right. And I think that comes, it's kind of bifurcated. I think you have this younger generation that's more interested in it and understands the importance of it. As a complete side note, I think this younger generation also, like, the right to privacy is going to be something that they're more interested in, things like that. So I think there's generationally a shift culturally in a number of different facets. We go back a couple of years to when COVID was a thing, and all of a sudden you had a number of people who never in their life thought about owning a gun, saw what was happening, and decided that now was a really good time to purchase a gun. Now, whether or not those people care about the right, or it's just, I got mine, so who cares what happens to everyone else, is a different story. But I think there were, at least from a standpoint of, these things serve a purpose that are functional, and they're not the evil I was told they are. Like, I can actually defend my home, myself, my family with one of these. I think there was a shift there as well. Gun culture itself is a very interesting, very interesting thing. I can't speak to the hunting world because that's not my bread and butter or really cup of tea, to be honest. I go and shoot pheasants. That's fun, but I'd like to go shoot an elk at some point. But the hunting space, I've always gotten the impression that they were never very much involved in the activism that surrounded the right to keep and bear arms, mainly because the things that they were using, the tools, the bolt action rifles and shotguns, were never really under attack by anybody. It was more the people that are looking at it from a standpoint of self-defense, defensive tyranny and things like that, that are like, okay, well, we have the firearms that hold more, have magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, or that are semi-automatic firearms that, serve a number of different utilities. But so I think gun culture overall, I think there's probably today more of a positive outlook on it. I did see a study, I think, within the last year that said, particularly, again, referring to the younger generation, that they were not supportive of bans on firearms, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'd have to look for that, but I think overall, from what we've seen, it's that, right now most people are pretty positive as it relates to the Second Amendment.
Well, that makes me feel good.
Yeah. So if someone listens to this podcast, Adam, and is like, I've heard enough, I really like SAF. I think Adam did a really good job explaining some very complex topics. I didn't know any of this. It helped give me some perspective. They become a member. What can they expect? Like, what are they going to hear from you? What information do they get from you? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so, that looks like a couple things. Certainly we have a social media presence, so we try to put out updates on social media as much as we can. We also run a weekly newsletter that's an email one where we, again, put out updates as to some of the things going on, new cases being filed, wins, other things that we try not to jam-pack people's inboxes full of junk. We don't, what we don't do is send legislative alerts. I think this is an important distinction to make, and it's not because we don't care, but it's because we're 501c3, so we're an educational foundation. We can't do the grassroots lobbying and activism that some of these other groups do. So again, it's not that we don't care, we're not interested. It's just from the IRS's perspective, we would be in some hot water if we did that. So, that's a brief overview of the kind of stuff. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that the organization is bifurcated as far as an educational component and then the legal component. And one of the things that we're actively working on right now is bolstering the educational side of things. We're currently in development of a program, if you will, or an idea, and we're waiting to see proof of concept on it. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but I do want to hint at it's an area where we see a need in the space and that we think we can fill a void, that we can help educate people more so on the importance of the Second Amendment and why it should be defended and why people should just care about it, even if they choose not to exercise that right themselves, why they should still be, staunchly like, okay, maybe it's not for me, but we should preserve this for others. So that's something I'm excited about. And again, I think it's a space that there is a void that nobody else is really doing, that we're actively working to create something to cater to that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big, like you said, even if a person chooses not to exercise it, if you preserve it for others, in essence, it is for them too, though. I mean, they can be, dramatically affected by that.
At the end of the day, I don't care if somebody goes and buys a gun or not. If they don't choose to exercise that right, that's fine. Where the issue lies is where they want to deprive others of the ability to exercise the right.
Right.
Life's full of choices. Nobody's saying that you need to buy a gun or you need to exercise the right, but when you go and actively try to deprive others of the ability to do it, that's where the problem lies.
Absolutely. But if you do want to buy a gun,
yes,
that's a great idea. And Vortex Optics has the up now.
Are we switching?
There he is.
Are we switching
there
into
he
the
is.
ad now?
Yeah. No, I mean, and that was like one of my questions. I kind of checked it off there because you covered it. But how do we educate reasonable people who maybe they're on the fence regarding gun-related policy or just like don't have an interest in it? It's not top of mind because they're not super interested. That's a big challenge.
It is. So trying to educate anybody on anything is a big challenge. So short of, and I'll use myself as an example here, right? Like, let's pick on me for a moment. Unless I'm actually really interested in the underlying thing, it doesn't matter how much information or, statistics or, whatever you want to throw at me, you throw at me. I just don't care at the end of the day. It's not of interest to me. You can't force me to consume something. And, that's one of the problems that I think we and, pick any number of other groups, topics, whatever, face, is that you can't force someone to care about it. Now, I think guns and the Second Amendment are a little easier because I think people have opinions about it. And so, again, I'll use myself as an example here. And you'll have to stop me if I already shared the story on with you guys. So I grew up in a house that was not pro-gun. I had a BB gun when I was a kid. Nobody showed me how to use it safely. So I probably did some very stupid things with it at the time. And I was down at scout camp in Rising Sun, Maryland, and I took rifle merit badge. And that was the first time I ever actually shot a gun and was shown any kind of gun safety for that matter. And I had this stupid grin that was on my face because shooting a rifle was fun. This was awesome. I'm a 12-year-old kid. Like, this is great. And that's where this all started for me, was in Scouts. Turned 18, bought a shotgun, stuffed it under my bed, was told to get rid of it. I still have the shotgun. I turned 21. I went out and got a carry permit. I bought a handgun on my 21st birthday. My parents saw the carry permit come in the mail, and I think the comment was along the lines of, you'll be dead in 2 weeks. And the reason I got the permit was because I had been watching the news and just kind of seeing the world we lived in, and made this determination that really at the end of the day, I'm responsible for my own safety. And I just want another tool in a toolbox to give me options. I don't want to ever have to pull out my gun, let alone shoot somebody. Like, that's not anything I hope ever happens. If I can go through the rest of my life with it only leaving a holster at the range, perfect. Exactly what I would like to do. But I saw it as just another tool in the toolbox and a way to potentially deal with a situation that I might not have any other options in. And so, I'm 21, so maybe 23, 24, my dad out of the blue asked me to take him to the range. Okay. Change, but not sure why, but so took him to the range. That same stupid grin that was on my face at 12 years old was now on his face. And all of a sudden, that's where for him that attitude started to shift. Now you got to remember, my dad was born in the Bronx, grew up in New Jersey, had no exposure to firearms. Probably all his opinion on it was based on what he saw in the news and what he consumed through other media and heard. So there was no practical experience, and you just couldn't understand why anybody would need any of these things, whether it was self-defense, fun, or otherwise. And so that was the beginning of the shift in his opinion on guns. It started with handguns. He didn't quite understand AR-15s and why anybody would need one of those or a 30-round magazine or any of this other stuff. But as time went on, that opinion even on those things shifted. Like, oh, I understand why somebody would want one of these, and I understand the utility of it. And I don't get the comments anymore that I used to get about this stuff. I'm like, oh, maybe I should buy one of these. Yes, you should buy one of these. I can help you with that. But I think the point of the story, and it's anecdotal, but I think when you look at people who have no exposure to it, and there's an opportunity to have that conversation, that's where you can make inroads with this stuff. Now, they have to be somewhat open-minded about it. If they're dead set in their stance that no, guns are bad, you're probably not getting anywhere. Likewise, if you have somebody who is very pro-Second Amendment and this is what they eat, sleep, breathe, somebody telling them the other perspective, they're never going to agree with them either.
Right.
So there is a middle ground. For the people that you can talk to and I think inform and whatnot. And I think it's just a matter of spotting where the opportunity is, or they ask a question and you're like, okay, you're kind of curious about this. What can I do to help at least inform you? And at the end of the day, maybe they won't be like my dad. Maybe they won't say like, okay, they make the baby steps from A to B to C to, okay, like, we're in the same camp now. Maybe they just end up on the fence. Like, you take them to the range, they go shoot, they have a good time, and they go, yeah, you know what, not for me, but I could kind of understand why somebody wants one. And
that's the key right there.
So I think that's probably the best I've got on it, because at the end of the day, you can't force feed people regardless of what the underlying thing is. They're just not, if they're like me anyway, or I would imagine most people are similar in that regard. Like, if they don't have an interest in it, they're just not going to care. They're going to blow right past it and off they go.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you point out a big thing there, though. Like, if a person is, open-minded enough, potentially curious, enjoys hearing other people's perspectives, which I do think is an excellent way to navigate life. You're probably not going to change my personal thoughts on the Second Amendment,
sure.
Full disclosure. But oftentimes you will see that shift because the things that you're talking about are readily apparent and discovered through that process. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes the end result is a result like what your dad had.
Yeah, me too. I had always, and still to this day, had a policy, if you will, like a personal preference. If I talked to somebody who was interested in guns and had no experience, I'm like, we're going to the range if you want, and you don't have to worry about anything. Like, we'll walk through the basic safety. You don't have to pay for ammo. I don't care. I'll bring a bunch of guns. You can shoot whatever you want. We'll start with 22s, just because everybody loves 22s. Like, 22s are a lot of fun. And if you don't like 22s, you're a monster. And then from there, we can go, on up, and whatever somebody wants to shoot, as long as we're doing it safely and having fun, like, we'll keep doing it. And I don't care how much of my ammo you shoot, because at the end of the day, what am I looking for? To convert your opinion, or at least have you walk away with a, neutral opinion at worst, but hopefully a positive one.
Yeah, for sure. And, at least a perspective that might be not consistent with the messaging that oftentimes is the only stream of, content or the narrative that they've received throughout their life. And, and sometimes, and I touched on this before, what I consider to be like, misinformation, like, if that's all I heard, and that's like what shaped my opinion on firearms and the Second Amendment, I'd be like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? But when you start hearing some other things, you're like, oh, wait a minute, you can poke some holes in that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a matter of how, and the other thing is just the barrier to entry and doing your own research, right? You see it in any number of contexts, but when somebody just throws stuff at you, like, okay, I'm just going to consume this, but actually trying to go and, well, is this right? Are they perhaps misrepresenting or twisting things? Statisticians do all kinds of crazy things with numbers that end up at a result that they want. But yeah, I mean, the barrier to entry is just, it's a lot to do that, and let's face it, who wants to do it?
Right, and like we talked about before, if you don't have some sort of vested interest,
sure,
you're just not going to get there, likely.
Yep.
Unfortunately, but no, very interesting, very interesting. What are you guys seeing, or do you guys get knowledge on like gun owners by the numbers? Like what is the breakdown? Like where does that lie? Just strictly 2A policy.
So, getting those numbers, I think you have a couple problems. And there's a couple ways you could kind of predict what those numbers are. Kind of. You could look at the number of guns sold. NSSF has that information. Now, of course, people buy multiple firearms, so is that going to give you an actual breakdown? No, it's not. You might get an idea of where firearms are sold more, what states, the types of firearms that are popular at the time, but it's never going to give you a true representation of numbers of people who own them. Then you get into surveys. So the annoying guy who calls you at dinner and wants to ask you a bunch of questions. You look at surveys that are done. Well, the problem with it is, anecdotally again, and kind of just from a sensical standpoint, gun owners tend to be private people. They certainly don't like lists. So if somebody's calling you and asking you questions about, like, well, do you own guns? Do you support the Second Amendment? Blah, blah, blah. Like, most people are not going to give them a straight up true answer or answer them at all. So I'm not sure that there's any good way to kind of really do that. I know there's estimates out there, and it's a significant, number, but off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is. I just remember kind of going like, okay, it's not small.
Now it depends on the survey. I am somewhat sympathetic to people who are like conducting the survey, because I had to do some surveys in college. And I kind of got my feelings hurt a handful of times, and so now I'm like, you know what, I'll answer. But again, given the context of the survey, I may be less inclined. But if it seems pretty benign, I'll answer your questions. Sorry, you got anything right now?
Oh, I thought I had something. I think the point you made, Adam, about if you're going to offer someone your perspective and it differs from theirs, I think a lot of us lose sight of some of the nuance associated with that and how important it is. Because, I mean, like forced adoption. Like, if someone came up to me and it's like, I don't know, like, about guns, like, I don't know if I'm interested, and I grab them, I'm like, you're coming with me. And we go to the range and we just shoot all day, and I'm not answering their questions. It's just like handing them stuff. Like, you're not going to change that person's perspective, and I think we lose sight of that a lot because we are creatures, we're humans, right? And we are passionate about the things we're passionate about, and I think we lose sight of that might not be as obvious to someone else. So I think that's a roundabout way of saying, like, to your point, if we find people that are interested in these things and we think maybe they're not going to buy a bunch of guns and maybe they're not going to become SAF members, but if we can keep them from swaying on the other side of their fence sitters, right? If you can keep them from swaying on the other side, that could be just as important long term. Like, that could be just as important. So treating all of those interactions as opportunities to portray the things that we love and like to do in a positive light, it's hard. It's a lot of work. But, man, is it important. It is so important.
Oh, it's so important. And so earlier when Adam was talking, you're like, aha, yes, that's the person. If I'm delivering this type of message, like people know me like, oh, I like to hunt, I like to shoot. They know what they're going to get as far as like my views on this issue. But if you're able to, influence is not the right word, but I guess at the end of the day, there's some sort of influence there. That person who their friend group is probably a lot like them. And when they deliver that message, I think it actually potentially could hold a lot more weight, even for me, who's a person who's very familiar with these types of things. So,
well, it's about who do you trust, right?
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
Oh my God, people don't trust me.
Well, 2 degrees removed, maybe not.
There, thank you, Adam. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, and that's maybe a lot of what we can, help facilitate is just, building that trust.
You can't just expect that these things are going to carry on forever. Like, I think that is so incredibly naive. It's just naive. And I think we all need to put in the work and the time and the care to nurture it.
Well, and I think one of the other things is that, this idea of winning, we won. Well, what did we win? You might have won today, but guess who's not stopping tomorrow? Guess who's waking up and going, okay, well, what else can we do? How else can we infringe on this right, in the name of safety or whatever the flag that they're using? How can we advance what it is we want to do? And I think gun owners tend to be apathetic. You get, 4 years of a Republican presidency and Congress, for that matter, and there's no pro-gun legislation being passed through, and gun owners don't seem to care. And meanwhile, those who want to infringe on the right are actively working as to, well, what other avenues can we do to make advances in the state legislatures or through different legal matters or litigation strategies. Like there's always a constant threat to the right. And it sucks to say. I mean, I would love to be in a position where I could tell you, like, yes, in 10 years we will win and I won't be working here anymore because I won't be needed here. That would be awesome. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. So it's a matter of just being vigilant in it. And I think the more people's opinions you can shift, from a public perspective anyway, the more people that are going to be inclined to either join the fight, potentially vote differently, potentially at least not actively attempt to destroy the Second Amendment and the right that it protects. Just my 2 cents. I've been wrong many times before, though.
No, that's making a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's a mic drop moment there. That's, yeah.
It is.
It's good.
It is. One thing, Sawyer, that we haven't brought up yet is we here at Vortex are supporters and believe in the Second Amendment Foundation and the work that you guys are doing. And we have a little bit of, we were talking about collaboration earlier.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to get out of this conversation without mentioning this because we've been working on a project, Sawyer, that you've been heavily involved in. So why don't we touch on that real quick?
Absolutely. I mean, we had the folks from SAF here, obviously, because we wanted to have them here to talk to them, to have them on the podcast. We've been talking for the last 2 days. We wanted them to come to Edge, see the facility, meet the team, right? Like, I think Vortex, we're really big on, like, we're going to say the things, but we're also going to do the things. I think that is very critical to your approach from advocacy, whether you're Coca-Cola or Vortex, right? Like, you need, in today's day and age, you need the receipts. You need to be doing the things that you say you're doing. And I think in the spirit of that, so Crafted Impact, if people aren't familiar with it, so we're on our 3rd iteration now. So it essentially is limited run apparel, and obviously the design needs to be cool. People need to like it. But the next iteration, all proceeds will be going to Second Amendment Foundation. So we're going to have a limited run of shirts. Obviously, we collaborated on the design. Adam was wearing it yesterday, actually at the range. It looks great. And it's just something.
Adam's a big part of that, though.
Yes. Yeah. Let's be fair here. Yeah. Let's be fair. Yep.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
He looked good. He shot good too.
It was really the shirt that did all the work.
You will shoot better if you get one of these shirts.
Yeah, that's what I heard. There's got to be a disclaimer here somewhere that we need to.
At the end of the day, the point of Crafted Impact is to support a cause and or organization that we are passionate about, that we work directly with, that we trust, that we can safely recommend to our consumer that this is someone you should support, SAF obviously fits in that bucket. And I think when you throw the apparel in too, it just gives another way for people to support something and put it on their back, Like it's I hope everyone joins. I hope everyone donates. Sometimes a cool shirt can help spark that and get that going, And I think for people listening or someone who buys a shirt, maybe they're not familiar with Second Amendment Foundation. So there's kind of many layers to that onion, but it's a small thing that we can do to hopefully shed more light on the organization, get people more involved, more educated. And from a monetary standpoint, we just talked for an hour about how expensive this litigation is. It takes time, it takes people, it takes money, and just support that way too. So it's a program we're proud of. We're looking at continuing to grow it, but we chose SAF. It was a pretty easy decision. They're kicking ass. So that shirt's going to be out in August, and get it while it's there because it's going to be gone.
Yep. And I think, sir, you mentioned something that I really liked is the shirt potentially could be a conversation starter. Like number one, it's a cool looking shirt. Somebody who may not be familiar with the logo. Oh, so what is that? A little bit more of a softer introduction than knocking on somebody's door and asking them, what their relationship with the Second Amendment is. So I think, and it's a cool shirt. You look good. You support a great cause. Like you said, the work that you guys are doing. Like I just can't imagine. Just the financial burden that you take on.
Yeah, it's not inexpensive to do the work, and it's there's a whole team at the Second Amendment Foundation. I think we've talked about me. I've talked a little bit about myself and some of the anecdotal stuff, but I think it's important to also note that I'm just one guy. I happen to be the guy sitting here talking to you folks, but we have a whole team of people that are very passionate about what we do at the foundation, much like you guys here at Vortex have a whole team that are very passionate about what you do. I work with some amazing people that have gotten some incredible things done, and we're very optimistic and working towards building a better future for everybody. And I want to take a moment to recognize them because I think unfortunately, some of the stuff gets associated with me more so just because I'm the guy that people see. And I don't want that. I want to make sure that everybody is given recognition for what they do because I wouldn't be sitting here without them. And the organization certainly wouldn't be as successful without all those people. So I think it's just worth mentioning.
Absolutely. And you yourself, Adam, and the organization, one thing that I really appreciate is, just how educated and sharp you guys are, how even keel you guys are. I think that goes a long way in delivering that message in a way that people can be super receptive to.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the one thing that's also important to think about in that regard is the even keelness and the message delivery has nothing to do with the tenacity of the mission.
No,
we're relentless in our pursuit for what we do. Just the way we deliver the message about it might be different.
Absolutely. Should we end on that?
I think so.
Adam, thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for talking with us. Every time we talk, I'm just like, there's a lot to know, a lot of work to do, and I'm glad to have you and the Second Amendment Foundation on our side to do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you are so inspired, go to the Second Amendment Foundation website, check it out, learn a little bit more, become a member, and fight the good fight with them. Bye, everybody.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.